therapy, not just access to CBD or THC, but access to the entire plant, all of its cannabinoids, terpenes, sesquiterpenes, flavonoids, everything you could possibly think of, we advocate for its use in a responsible fashion as medicine. We also want to take a moment to remind you that we advocate for the use of responsibility when it comes to the use of high-potency THC cannabis. As it does have a place in medicine, it can also be abused, and it is our idea to educate about use responsibly. Today you will learn more about cannabis in the plant form from all of these speakers. They're donating their time to be here today, and we are very grateful, and it is my honor to present our first speaker today, Dr. Prakash Nagarkatti.
Thank you, Emily, so much for the kind invitation. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a beautiful day in South Carolina, right? It's beautiful outside, sunny and bright, and inside here we are talking about marijuana. So what I'm going to do today is I've been doing research on cannabinoids for last 15 years, and we published extensively research on cannabinoids. So what I'm going to do today is basically introduce you to what are cannabinoids, what are cannabinoid receptors, and talk about more about the research that we have done in the past 15 years or so. So just as a way of introduction, I'm basically an immunologist. That means I study the immune response, how our immune response fights against infections, cancer, and so on and so forth. And over the last 15 years or so, when I began to realize that our immune cells express these cannabinoid receptors, I got excited about trying to find out what are these cells doing, or what are these receptors doing on the immune cells, and what way we can learn from this. And that led to some exciting observations, and our research has been extensively covered from BBC News to a PBS documentary that we'll talk about. And so right now I oversee research across the entire University of South Carolina. But in addition to that, I also do actively research on cannabinoids. So I'm going to share some of those thoughts with you all. So as a way of introduction, marijuana, or derived from the plant Cannabis sativa, the use of cannabinoids, so the use of marijuana plant, dates back to almost 2727 BC, and the first documented evidence used by Emperor Shen Neng from China. And then in 2008, they were also able to excavate a Chinese tomb. And when they tried to find out, how old this was, they found out that it was almost 2,700 years old Chinese tomb. And in that tomb, they were able to identify that this skeleton also had about 2 pounds of cannabis, which goes to demonstrate that way back, almost 2,000 to 3,000 years ago, people in China used to use this potentially for medicinal purposes as well as for spiritual reasons. And then if you go back to the Hindu sacred text, what is called as the Atharva Veda, and you find that this dates back to almost 2000 BC, and you have clearly seen there also the use or mention of the use of what is called as bhang, and that is consisting of dried cannabis leaves, seeds, and stems. So therefore, marijuana has been there with us for thousands of years, and for thousands of years people have used this for medicinal purposes till such time more recently that we discovered newer drugs, and marijuana became more of a recreational drug. So when did marijuana come into United States? It was around 1611 to 1762. The Jamestown settlers were responsible for bringing the marijuana to North America. And in 1840, marijuana becomes the mainstream medicine actually in the West, because that time we didn't have other types of medicine. So marijuana was used extensively for treating a large number of different illnesses. And in 1850, marijuana was added to the US pharmacopoeia. And in 1930, American pharmaceutical firms used to actually sell the extracts of marijuana as medicines. But in 1970, there was Controlled Substance Act, which you all are familiar with, which classified various types of drugs that are either toxic or having some tremendous side effects. And based on that, the Controlled Substance Act created 5 different classes of substances, and marijuana was put under Schedule 1 drug. So what does Schedule 1 drug consist of? As you can see, it consists of heroin, ecstasy, LSD, and marijuana. So all these compounds currently are classified as Schedule 1 because there is no accepted medicinal use of these compounds, and also the fact that it has high potential for abuse. And then you have Schedule 2, which consists of oxycodone, morphine, cocaine, and so on. And also they also have high potential for abuse and potentially leading to severe psychological or physical dependence. So unfortunately, marijuana, though it was not toxic as compared to the other drugs that were classified, it was put under Schedule 1. And if you look at the death from overdose, these are the data derived from, taken from the National Institute of Drug Abuse or National Institute of Health. If you look at the number of deaths from heroin abuse or overdose from cocaine or overdose from prescription drugs and opioids, you'll find that every year, hundreds of thousands of people die from abusing or overdose of all these different types of drugs, either in Schedule 1 or Schedule 2. But then you find that marijuana is not associated with severe toxicity, or there are not instances of death as it relates to abuse or overdose of marijuana. And then it comes talking about addiction or dependence rates. If you look at cannabis, the addiction rate or the dependence rate is only 9%, same as almost caffeine, when compared to alcohol is 15%, cocaine is 17%, heroin 23%, and tobacco is 32%. So therefore, a lot of scientists and physicians have begun to question about, was it right on the part of the government to have put marijuana under Schedule 1? So more and more, because of anecdotal evidence to show that marijuana can be used to treat a wide array of diseases, slowly states have started legalizing marijuana. Currently, there are over 23 states and the District of Columbia that have used some form of legalized marijuana, medical marijuana. And then there are certain other states like Alaska, Colorado, Oregon, and Washington state where they're also legalized for recreational use. And other states are watching to see how these states will do in terms of recreational use. Is it going to impact the health, as well as is it going to impact some of the other safety issues involved in day-to-day life, to see whether this recreational use is going to work or not. So now onwards, I'm going to talk mostly about my experience as a scientist. Okay, so I have no bias here. I'm a scientist, so whatever I find, I have to report. If marijuana is bad, I'm going to report it's bad. If it's good, I'm going to report it as good, right? Because I'm truly a scientist. So just like Emily was talking about, she was saying that, they are supporting the use of the whole plant and not extracts, or not specifically CBD or THC and so on. And that makes sense in the fact that marijuana has over 400 chemicals. And not all of those chemicals have been studied. The only 2 chemicals that have been extensively studied is the delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, or abbreviated as THC, which was discovered in 1964. And this is the compound that is found in the marijuana plant, which is responsible for the psychotropic effect that makes you feel high. And then there is another compound which has been extensively studied, which is called as cannabidiol, and that is non-psychoactive, which is also found in the marijuana plant. And cannabidiol has also been shown to be very beneficial in treatment of certain diseases, which we'll talk about later on. So because clearly THC was shown to, in addition to its psychotropic effects, it was shown that THC can help in prevention of nausea and vomiting, particularly in cancer patients who take chemotherapy and radiation therapy, as well as it helps to gain weight, particularly people who are losing weight, such as HIV/AIDS patients, that a pharmaceutical drug called Marinol was approved by FDA for use in patients for treatment of nausea, vomiting, and to gain weight and so on. More recently, another drug, which is a combination called Sativex, which is a combination of THC and CBD, they did clinical trials in Europe, and they found that people with multiple sclerosis, which is an autoimmune disease in which the immune system destroys your brain cells and spinal cord cells, thereby causing paralysis. And they found that a combination of THC and CBD is helpful in preventing the neuropathic pain as well as spasticity that is associated with the MS. This drug has been approved in Europe and in Canada and almost 30 other countries. And currently, United States, the FDA is looking at it to try to see whether they should approve its use in the US as well. Cannabinoids have also been used to treat intraocular pressure. And so there's a lot of research going on to try to see whether cannabinoids can be used to treat glaucomas as well. Now, just to give you an overview, like how do these cannabinoids act, right? So when marijuana was found to cause psychotropic effects, researchers tried to address, okay, what are the mechanisms that are responsible for these psychotropic effects? That research led to identification of what are called as cannabinoid receptors. So these chemicals, THC and other compounds, act on receptors which are expressed in the brain as well as in the spinal cord. And these receptors are called as CB1 receptors, okay, cannabinoid receptor 1. But interestingly, and because of which you get psychotropic effects, but interestingly, scientists also discovered that our immune cells, these are the cells that fight our body against infections or cancer, immune cells also express another type of receptor called as CB2. And the CB2 receptors are not psychotropic. That means if you prepare a compound that acts only on CB2 receptors, you're not going to have any psychotropic effects. You're not going to feel high about it. So therefore, clearly, there are two types of receptors, CB1, which is found primarily in the brain, CB2, that is found in the immune system. And so when I heard about it in early 2000 or so, I tried to focus our research on, okay, what are these receptors doing on the immune cells? Okay, why are they expressed, right? And that research also led to the discovery of endocannabinoids. That means to say that we, as human beings, also produce our own cannabinoids, which are very similar in structure to the cannabinoids that are produced by the marijuana plant. So as you can see on the right side, the structure of THC is very similar to the cannabinoids that we produce within our own system, right? So then you're going to ask me, okay, if that be the case, why are we not high all the time? And the reason for that is Mother Nature has made sure that, if you feel high, you're going to sit and do nothing else. You need to do work, right? So what Mother Nature has done is that you produce what are called as certain enzymes, such as fatty acid amide hydrolase. These are enzymes that break down rapidly the endocannabinoids that you produce. So first of all, you produce small amounts of endocannabinoids, and secondly, as soon as they are produced, they are broken down, because of which you don't have very high levels of endocannabinoids in your system. But then, these cannabinoids and endocannabinoids are absolutely critical for our memory, for our appetite, for metabolic functions, so that we sleep very well, our thermoregulation, as well as immune functions. So we have these cannabinoids and cannabinoid receptor systems which are absolutely critical for us to function normally, because it affects a wide array of functions that we perform on a day-to-day basis. So therefore, now the research is leading to, if people are born with some defect, if either there are mutations in the receptor or we do not produce enough of these endocannabinoids, then trying to administer cannabinoids from a plant or from some other source, would that help to cure certain diseases? So that's an exciting area of research that's already going on. And that may help explain why marijuana cannabinoids, when taken, might help certain individuals, because either they may have deficiency in our own cannabinoids that we produce, or we might have deficiency in the receptors that we produce, and that might be leading to a wide array of diseases. So therefore, that addresses, or that looks at how cannabinoids can be used for the treatment of diseases. The other exciting thing is, I was telling you that we're producing these enzymes, right? What if you block the enzymes? If you block the enzymes, we're going to produce more and more of endocannabinoids. Then maybe that, those are helpful to treat certain diseases. So those are the type of research that's also going on to try to see whether we can block the enzymes, increase the level of endocannabinoids, and maybe that would also help in the treatment of a wide array of diseases. So there's a lot of exciting research that's going on in this particular area. Now, coming specifically to the immune response, our main function of the immune response is to protect us against viruses, bacteria, parasites, fungi, cancers, you name it, and our immune system is there to protect us against these infections. So because of which, our immune system has a wide array of cells: T cells, B cells, neutrophils, lymphocytes, I could go on and on. And so these cells, it's almost like an army, and these cells and the factors that they produce, what I call as cytokines or chemokines, are responsible for protecting us against a wide array of infections and cancer. So what happens is that whenever we get infected or whenever we have cancer, our T cells and B cells are all immune cells, trigger inflammation, right? When you have a cut, after a few hours, you start swelling, you see a swelling, and that is because it's caused by inflammation, where the immune cells come to that particular site, try to get rid of the infection, try to get rid of the damaged tissue, so that you can go back to your skin and everything goes back to normal levels. So inflammation is very critical for us to protect us against infections and cancer. But what happens in certain individuals is that after the infection is cleared, the inflammation does not go away, or inflammation stays in your system for a longer period of time, thereby causing chronic inflammation. And that chronic inflammation sometimes can attack your own cells or your own tissues, thereby causing what I call as autoimmune or inflammatory diseases. And I'm showing the example of the joints in arthritis. The immune cells or the inflammation destroys your joints and thereby causing arthritis. It can destroy your brain or spinal cord, causing multiple sclerosis. And now the immunologists and scientists believe that pretty much all major diseases, whether it's cancer, heart attacks, Alzheimer's, autoimmune diseases, obesity, diabetes, they all have there is inflammation is the underlying cause of all of those major clinical disorders. So therefore, if you have a drug, if you have a compound that can block chronic inflammation, we might find answers to a variety of trying to solve the pathogenesis of a variety of diseases. Now let me focus on what I call as autoimmune diseases, right? So autoimmune diseases are diseases in which your immune system goes haywire and starts destroying your own cells and your own tissues. And there are over 80 autoimmune diseases, such as arthritis, thyroiditis, lupus, myasthenia gravis, multiple sclerosis, Crohn's disease, in which the immune system is attacking certain organs or certain tissues, okay? And that results from chronic inflammation. So the question is, how do you treat these diseases? Currently, basically, there is no cure. There is no treatment, proper treatment available for these autoimmune diseases. And what we have are drugs that suppress or that kill the immune system or the immune cells, such as corticosteroids, cyclosporins, cytoxins, NSAIDs, that you take normally, like ibuprofens. But all of these compounds, they destroy the immune cells to an extent that it causes severe toxicity. They also have severe side effects, that it causes severe GI toxicity. They cause severe cardiovascular toxicity, because of which overdose of a lot of these things lead to hospitalization, and people can even die from these. Also, it can make an individual more susceptible to infections, more susceptible to cancers, and so on and so forth. So clearly, there is a need for treatment of these inflammatory diseases. There is a need for treatment of these autoimmune diseases. So now let me come back to some of the research that we have done. What we were able to show is that basically immune cells express these CB1 and CB2 receptors, and that when you activate these receptors, the immune cells which are activated, they commit suicide through DNA fragmentation, a process what is called as apoptosis or apoptosis. So therefore, you take an activated immune cell and you add cannabinoids to that, it undergoes apoptosis through, or it undergoes cell death through a process called as apoptosis. And as you can see here, as you increase the dose of these cannabinoids, you can kill almost 90% of these activated immune cells. These cannabinoids also trigger a unique type of immune cells that are involved in suppressing inflammation, what I call as myeloid-derived suppressor cells. And when we reported this, it was excitement all over the world. This was picked up by news media all over, because if you inject cannabinoids in the mouse, for example, within a matter of few hours, you can get millions and millions of these cells activated, which are highly suppressive, or which suppress the immune response or inflammation. So we tested a lot of these drugs, cannabinoids, on various models of autoimmune disease, such as colitis. And as you can see here, if you take a section of the colon, there is tremendous inflammation in colitis patients, as well as in the mouse models of colitis. And when you treat these with THC or CBD, you can pretty much completely wipe out the inflammation, and the inflammation that you see in the colon completely disappears. In clinical trials, they also shown that cannabis induces a clinical response in patients with Crohn's disease, that when patients were given cannabis cigarette, which has about 115 milligrams of THC, almost 45% of them saw complete remission, and they had improved appetite as well as pain symptoms. And they were completely weaned off from the steroid dependency. We also used cannabinoids to try to see whether it's effective against autoimmune hepatitis. Autoimmune hepatitis is triggered by your immune system destroying your own liver, right? And we were able to show that in experimental animals, when you cause this disease in the liver, your AST enzymes, the AST and ALT levels increase dramatically, and that can be completely suppressed or treated following injection or administration of these cannabinoids. And these are just histological pictures to show you how effective the THC is in preventing the inflammation in the liver. And these are data which shows that, as I said, during inflammation, we produce a large number of cytokines. These are molecules that are responsible for inflammation, such as interleukin-2, tumor necrosis factor, and so on and so forth. And cannabinoids can completely suppress these production of these cytokines. So marijuana plant has the psychoactive THC and the non-psychoactive cannabidiol. We found that cannabidiol also acts the same way as THC to prevent inflammation, but that THC is much more potent than cannabidiol, okay? We found repeatedly that when you give same dose of THC versus cannabidiol, THC is much more potent than cannabidiol in terms of suppressing inflammation. But the adverse effect of that is THC is psychoactive, whereas cannabidiol is not. So these are some studies that we found that cannabinoids are effective against MS or multiple sclerosis. And as I told you, recently there have been drugs that have been prepared with a combination of THC and CBD to treat MS patients as well. And this is the drug that I was telling you about, Sativex, which has been approved in 11 countries against MS. And MS impacts, or multiple sclerosis impacts, over 1.2 million people worldwide. And it's been approved for treating spasticity in UK and Canada, and clinical trials are currently going on as well. So there's also evidence to show that smoked cannabis relieves chronic neuropathic pain from HIV. And it has also been shown that HIV, even after treatment with the cocktail of drugs, small amounts of HIV remain in your system. And that HIV triggers chronic inflammation, because of which you get all the neuropathic pain. And so therefore, cannabinoids, particularly THC, which suppresses inflammation, is also helpful in terms of trying to reduce the neuropathic pain. So therefore, the neuropathic pain found in the HIV/AIDS patient is also related to latent infection, is also related to inflammation, and therefore marijuana or THC is also effective to try to reduce those pains as well. There's a lot of research going on also to try to see whether cannabinoids can be used in the treatment of uveitis, which is, you find that it's an inflammation in the eye, and sorry. Yes. So moving on to briefly talking about the effect of cannabis against cancer, whether cannabinoids are effective against cancer. We were the first lab to show that cannabinoids receptors like CB2 are expressed even on certain types of cancers. We first focused on lymphomas, leukemias, myelomas. These are cancers that originate from our own immune system, right? And so when the cancers originate from our normal immune cells, they were found to continue to express these cannabinoid receptors. And same way as activated immune cells, when you incubated these cells with cannabinoids, they undergo apoptosis, or they commit suicide through DNA fragmentation. So these are some of the cells, cancer cells, that we can culture along with the cannabinoids, and you can see that they start dying very pretty soon. And then we did an experiment in the mouse model. We took mice that have been transplanted with tumors, and we injected THC into those mice, and we found that out of those, I've shown you about 6 mice there, in some mice there was dramatic tumor regression. More importantly, in almost 50% of the mice, the tumors completely disappeared. And these mice were then so resistant that even after we inject millions of cancer cells, the cancer would not grow into those mice. And we published this paper in a highly respected journal called as Blood. And that caught the attention worldwide about the efficacy of THC as well as cannabinoids on the treatment of cancer. In the same patient, in the same paper, we also looked at whether THC can kill human leukemic cells, and we're able to show that if you take leukemic cells from cancer patients, culture them with cannabinoids, and you can show that clearly they die within no time through a process called as apoptosis, which we also published in the journal Blood. So that's the publication that we had in journal Blood. And again, those of you who have not watched this, there was a PBS documentary a few years ago, what is called as Clearing the Smoke, which is a 1-hour documentary about the efficacy of marijuana on a variety of diseases, and particularly cancer. And in that particular documentary, they have highlighted the research that we have done at University of South Carolina. For almost 20 minutes out of that 1-hour program covers the research that we have done in our own lab. So currently, several scientists have confirmed that it can be used in the treatment of lymphomas, leukemias, gliomas, lung carcinomas, breast cancer, prostate cancer, and melanomas. Treatment of glioblastomas is extremely difficult. You know that Senator Kennedy died from glioblastoma, and it's a very aggressive cancer, it's very difficult to treat. But these cancers continue to express cannabinoid receptors, because of which there is significant potential to do further clinical trials on use of cannabinoids and the right dose and right way of administration to treat these glioblastomas as well. Bone marrow transplantation. Again, you must have heard about the fact that there are a lot of clinical situations, particularly after radiation chemotherapy, or people are born with certain genetic diseases in which you do bone marrow transplantation. And if the bone marrow transplantation is not matched properly, then there is what is called as the graft versus host reaction. That is, the immune cells that are mature immune cells that are transferred in the bone marrow can go and destroy a person, the patient, and ultimately, it's very difficult to treat. That patient can completely die. It's almost like an autoimmune disease. And as you can see there in that particular figure, we have been able to show that cannabinoids are so effective in preventing the graft versus host disease. You can see the spleens that are enlarged on the left side. That is from graft versus host disease. After treatment with THC, the spleens almost recover to the normal size. It's an amazing observation that we've seen, that cannabinoids can be used in the treatment of preventing graft versus host disease, and we are planning to do the clinical trials with that as well. This is just a histopathology of that. So with that, I would like to conclude my talk by saying that we produce our own cannabinoid, just like the marijuana plant does, right? We also have receptors for these cannabinoids. The cannabinoids that we produce, called endocannabinoids, act on our receptors, which are absolutely critical for us to carry out a lot of functions, without which we will not be normal individuals, right? And there is a possibility that there are individuals who have some mutations in those receptors, or individuals who do not produce enough of these endocannabinoids, and those might lead to certain diseases. So in addition to that, we also shown that cannabinoid receptors expressed on the immune cells can be targeted by the marijuana cannabinoids in a way that would be beneficial to suppress inflammation in those diseases. I showed you almost 80 different diseases in which there is no cure and there is no proper treatment, right? So marijuana has over 400 chemicals, and a lot of research needs to be done, but clearly there are compounds that are absolutely beneficial in terms of trying to prevent inflammation and therefore help in treatment of autoimmune diseases. In addition, what we have shown is that when normal cells become cancerous, they continue to express these cannabinoid receptors, because of which we can target those cancer cells as well and try to find cures for cancers as well. So there is tremendous opportunity for us to continue to do research, and as a scientist, I would say that marijuana has tremendous potential to do additional research to try to see how we can prevent and cure autoimmune diseases as well as cancers. I would like to thank the members of our lab, as well as Dr. Mitzi Nagarkatti, my wife, who has been, she's the chair of the Department of Pathology, Microbiology, Immunology at the medical school at USC, and we have been collaborating for a number of years trying to identify the pathways and the beneficial effects of marijuana cannabinoids. With that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and later on, I think I will be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.